coming, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me. And my name is Robert Rich, and I'm mostly known for making a certain slow sort of music, although not everything I do is slow. I got a little bit notorious some 30 years ago for playing all-night concerts and encouraging people to bring sleeping bags and a pillow and sleep through them. So this is kind of what that music sounds like. I'll turn it down a little bit. So a lot of people ask, what is this all about? Why do you make stuff that's so mellow? Are you a mellow person? No, I'm not a mellow person. Are you trying to relax the world? No, I'm not. To me, I actually find that the world is extremely impinging upon my thought process, and I personally just have to find a little bubble of silence so that I can focus and I can think. I wonder if maybe sometimes I'm Asperger's syndrome or something, but I seem to be pretty functional. I just that the world is loud, so the music is often quiet. And does this work? Wow. Thanks, Pierre. That's much better. So, when people think of ambient music, sometimes they lump it in with the sort of 80s and 90s new age music stuff, relaxation music. And there's some subtle differences with what I'm trying to do and other people that are sort of in my category. I prefer the term deep listening, by the way, which is a term coined by Pauline Oliveros. People think that if something's mellow, it has to be somewhat anti-intellectual. If it's relaxing, it's not challenging. People will call it, opium music, Muzak, reputation in the shopping malls and elevators. I'm trying to do something very different from blanketing over the world. I'm trying to accentuate silence and actually accentuate the subtle sounds around us. I also have a problem with these ideas of healing music. Sometimes you'll see people essentially trying to sell snake oil sound as healing. Healing for whom? I mean, if you grew up listening to death metal, some mellow piano music might make you want to pull your teeth out. So I think that it's all very relative. Music is a stylistic form. I'm very influenced by this book from the late 70s, Soundscapes, the Tuning of the World. R. Murray Schafer is a composer in Canada. And this is a wonderful quote, pretty typical of his writing. Modern man is beginning to inhabit a world with an acoustic environment radically different from any he has hitherto known, an indiscriminate and imperialistic spread of more and larger sounds into every corner of man's life. The world's soundscape has reached an apex of vulgarity in our time. This observation is of course relative, so people are very fond of the sounds that humans make. I personally prefer the sounds that the world makes, and I find that they make me think better. Often, I'm not alone here. Many people who listen to my music find that they can work well to it. A lot of programmers, artists, scientists will listen to this kind of music as a kind of stimulant, just like they would listen to classical music in some areas. What you're hearing here is a recording of frogs that I made back in the 70s when I was in high school at my grandparents' house in Menlo Park. There was a creek nearby. And these kinds of recordings really started me on a path of listening to sound and using natural sounds as a form of music. It's a little bit different from the kind of new age piano and bird songs kind of thing. I was really much more interested in a kind of musique concrète approach of taking the natural world and collaborating with it artistically. There's many other influences that I have that led to this idea of playing all night long. It's really a bad business model, by the way. It would be a lot smarter if you're some punk band playing a 30-minute set. You get a lot more audience and you don't have to work as hard. But oftentimes this approach was really to find a way to get people to listen to sound differently, to stay in one place for a long time, and to allow themselves to use sound as a kind of inner guide rather than entertainment. Because by nature, this kind of sound isn't very engaging unless you engage actively with it. The trick was to get people to stay in one place at one time, for a long time, I need to say, and that is where the idea of bringing a sleeping bag. So this this approach to all-night music was trying to encourage a kind of journeying into different states of consciousness. I had a strong interest in psychophysiology and psychologists like Charles Tart, state psychology. The fact that we can enter into parallel ways of processing information, internal information or external information, in these all-night, very quiet kinds of environments, people don't sleep as deeply. So the natural tendency is, because there's people around you, you'll be more activated. There's going to be noises, people turning over, people snoring, getting up, moving around. So therefore, it's not meant to be a way to sleep more deeply. It's actually a very poor sleep, but the music provides a kind of thread. The metaphor being, if you're a cave explorer, you might leave a little string behind you to help you get your way out of the cave. The music is like that conscious thread that as you dive into sleep, you can sort of skim along the surface and use an attentive trick of continuity of thought. The sound brings you sort of into light stage of sleep. When we are in light stages of sleep, we have what we call hypnopompic or hypnagogic illusions. These are dream-like states of consciousness, not REM sleep, but much more abstracted, more random. Then also, as we dive deeper into REM sleep, we have more evolved dreams. These states are less aware of external stimulus. Your sensory apparatus generally are turned off, but the environment that you're in can link into dreams in very strange ways, and you get very activated dreams also. So we're dealing with this idea of states of consciousness. My own approach to this slow music, to ambient music, I feel, kind of my personal musical history, I don't think any anthropologist has been able to prove this, because we can't ask people 200,000 years ago what their ritual practices were. We can see some of their iconography. I think music probably started with two roles. One is as social ritual, and the other is as trance ritual. And I see that we still have this basic bifurcation in the way we treat music now. We have pop music, storytelling, courtship, and we have a ritual role, which is often one reason why religious music is often more of an introspective variety. Also, I'd say that the tradition from the 60s, a psychedelic experience and that kind of music, also ties into this role of music as a conscious state-inducing, trance-inducing mechanism within the human body. The sleep concerts are definitely connected to the second aspect of music, the ritual medicine idea, not healing so much, but the idea of, for example, the medicine man, this being a Navajo shaman. So let me spend the rest of the talk, the next 10 minutes or so, introducing you to some of my biggest influences, the people that changed the way I thought about music, and the predecessors to, the shoulders that I'm standing on. I'd like to thank Charles Amercani, and first of all, I grew up here in the South Bay. I ended up going to school here at Stanford a long time ago. And within range of my radio, back in the 70s, was a station in Berkeley called KPFA. And Charles Amercani was a noted composer himself, sound poet, and he was music director at KPFA for at least 10 years, probably 15, and brought some of the most interesting modern tonal composers to our attention here in the Bay Area. And also, in the music programming, brought some amazing world music to the airwaves. And that influenced me probably more than Western music, more than classical music. I grew up with jazz in the household. My father, a jazz guitarist. So that, I came back to love that later. But I'd like to thank Charles for bringing this to a lot of people's attention. He's still active, by the way. He runs Other Minds Foundation here in San Francisco. What you're hearing now is Javanese music from the central chord of solo. And in Java, the Wayan puppet plays, which they perform on holidays too, they tell the story of the Ramayana. And these will go on for 2 or 3 days sometimes, whole weekends. The whole village comes out. It's an all night, all day phenomenon with children running around, with food being served. It's a communal event, but it's also a very focused event. It's something that brings the community together in a kind of ritual. And this music will go on all night long. Also, in India, the classical music is structured by hours of the day. You have talas, which are these 2-hour cycles, and there's many, many ragas that are written to go on in the middle of the night. And traditionally in North Indian classical music, you'll have concerts that are 8 hours long. People will listen very focused all night long to music that's meant to be played at 2 or 3 in the morning. And also in the Navajo medicine ceremonies, you have things like the Blessing Way, which goes for 2 or 3 days. If a person is sick psychologically or physically, they can hire a shaman to perform. And this is a song that lasts for days without sleeping. And it has to be exact to the word, or else it's invalidated. This is not improvised ritual stuff. This is very classical structured song, ritual, healing music. It's an interesting hybrid. Also in the West, of course, we have the Holy Day vigils. Things like midnight mass, Christmas, and Easter, and things. So these are not only third world traditions. In modernism in the 20th century, there is a parallel thread of tonal music that simultaneously developed as the music got more and more complex and atonal in the intellectual tradition. In this parallel tradition of art music, there were people who were trying to strip away the complexity. This is a piece by John Cage called In a Landscape, performed on gamelan. There's other threads in this minimalist, tonalist tradition. Probably started when some of the French composers like Debussy saw Javanese gamelan at the International Exposition in the 1880s. Actually, it was 1892. In the 1920s, you had a minimalist composer, Harry Partch, in the United States, design a 43-note per octave tuning system, create all of his own instruments from scratch, created an orchestra playing strange kinds of opera, and he reviled the equal-tempered Schoenberg tradition of serial tone rows and created an entirely other structure of tonal new music. You have John Cage, who rejected the idea of music requiring notes and said that music is structured sound. Some of his music, like this, is very beautiful and meditative. Louis Harrison was a local composer. He passed away about 8 years ago. A wonderful person who brought American gamelan from Indonesia, set up several gamelan orchestras in California. Then we have the Fluxus and the Minimalist movements in the 60s. What you're hearing now is Lamont Young, the second movement of the high-tension wide step-down transformer. He would create happenings that would go on for days. Again, this long-form idea. And would also set up sound installations that would be set up for months. Very loud clusters of sine waves that would create ringing tones in the room. You could walk around and the sound would change as you moved in the room. It would show you that music is in your head. It's not just out there in an instrument. Richard Heyman was part of the Fluxus movement. He had this funny tendency to do performances where he would fall asleep on a hammock and put whistles in his mouth. And people would watch him breathe, and the whistle would sing as he breathed in and out. When I read about that, I thought, well, that's kind of lazy. You know, the musician should be doing more work than that. So that's kind of where the idea for the sleep concert came from. Then, of course, we had, right around here in the 60s, the acid tests and the Grateful Dead playing all night long, much more of a sensory overload experience. But I think many of the people who were around there at that time would argue that it was also a kind of shamanic experience, a group ritual. Terry Riley was probably my biggest influence, and Terry, also a minimalist, would play all night long, tape loop music and keyboard improvisations. Bill Fontana was primarily known for his sound relocation work. He would, for example, one of my favorite pieces of his, he had 8 microphones set up almost a kilometer apart from each other, stretched out over a kilometer, on the Great Barrier Reef of Australia. Recorded it to an 8-track tape, reel-to-reel tape, for several hours. A part of the beach where the wave propagated down the beach in one direction all the time. And then he would set up 8 speakers, one connected to each track on that tape, in museum galleries, down hallways. And you could stand there in the gallery and it would reconstruct the wavefront of the ocean wave passing by you. He also did a piece with the Golden Gate Bridge, put up piezo sensors attached to radio transmitters. And in a gallery in San Francisco, you could sit there and listen to the effects of the wind on the steelwork of the bridge, creating gong-like sounds and percussion-like sounds. Very, very deep and powerful kinds of sound exploration. This is Terry Riley. He probably invented minimalism with a piece in 1964 called In C. The entire piece was on one piece of score paper, and it involved loops, and the musicians would play cyclically through the loops. A cooperative piece, sort of a group improvisation with specific notes. He also is credited for inventing the tape loop, the open tape loop, which is kind of a memory device you can improvise with yourself. This is a piece called Descending Moonshine Dervishes from 1975. And he would perform this kind of thing all night long. Sometimes, let's say, slightly energized with hallucinations, famously so. And he's still with us. He lives in California. He lives up in Grass Valley, and truly one of the great American composers. Off on more of the sound front, Anita Lockwood was another huge influence on me. Her work is much more conceptual. This is a picture of what she called the piano garden she planted in England. It's a piece that takes many, many years to perform. She planted alder trees underneath the pianos, which in a while would lift the piano up into the sky and it would slowly decompose and start falling apart, making some very loud sounds occasionally. She also did a piece where she dropped a piano from a helicopter with microphones inside of it. And she did a famous piece where she burnt a piano with asbestos-coated microphones. And as it burnt, the strings would explode and break apart. Violent music, actually. But much of her best music is extremely meditative, and it deals with the soundscape around us. This is one of the pieces from a microscopic study of glass sounds. Is a very unlikely and probably the biggest musical influence on me of all. When I was a kid, in the cutout section of a record store, I found this thing, Wind Harp, Song from the Hill, with a wonderful 60s hippie front cover. I had no idea what this was. I was probably 10 years old. Turned out that it was a fairly well-known album. I didn't even know it. It was used in The Exorcist. And in that context, you'd think it was frightening music. To me, without knowing that, what I heard was the sound of everything at once. It was one of the most beautiful sounds I had ever heard in my life. And this probably has more to do with the way I use tone clusters and extended clouds of sound and the way they shift, and I love this sense of abstract. To me, it's the sonic equivalent of don't know, field painting or something like that. Pauline Oliveros is the person who coined the phrase deep listening, which I try to use instead of ambient music and things like that. What I like about that phrase is that it tells instructions to the listener. It doesn't describe the music itself. It tells you how to listen, because this is how to get the most out of this music. She was a friend of Terry Riley's at the Tate Music Center in San Francisco in the early 60s, and she's still around working.
Mills. Not San Francisco. Mills College, Oakland.
Well, it moved to Mills. It started in San Francisco. It moved to Mills after 1 year. Yeah, it became Mills, and then Larry Polanski took it over in the early 70s. Yeah. But right. Ava Lucier, another extreme sound artist. This is a piece called Music on a Long Thin Wire, which is set up over about 100-meter length, and there's magnets resonating a very tight wire, like a telephone wire. And this was set up for months, I think in Vancouver. So this is a composition that takes place over weeks and weeks. And lastly, John Cage. It's no accident that I performed my first online concert in January of 1982. I had just heard this performance, which went on all night. I heard it on KPFA. Barry Nemeche is a sound artist who did the electronics for this. It's a collaboration. They played for 9 hours. They did 2 hours on, 1 hour off, 3 sections. Played all night long. And I figured, this fits kind of the place my head is. I could do this. I could play all night long. And this was a huge inspiration. This is the recording I made off the radio, by the way, when I was a freshman in college. This was in my I stayed up all night listening to the radio instead of studying. And in case you think this is just old stuff and it's dead, I was actually invited to play the first flute concert I've done in 10 years in Poland, Krakow, Poland, at the Unsound Festival last year. So that is me performing in an empty Russian-built hotel in Krakow with about 200 people in the audience. So I'm now actually working on a sequel to my 7-hour song game, which I hope to come out this year. Probably called, I was thinking called Continuum, but now I'm thinking probably Perpetual is what it would be called. So, anyway, and that's it.